Once we have our 4x4 grids, our next step is we are going to stack and solder them together. So what you're going to need is your jig, the next two layers that you're going to stack together, and you're going to need 3 wooden spacers. Mine are about 1/2 inch wide and about 3/16 to 1/4 inch thick. The very first 2 layers that you stack are the layers that have the little bends on them. So this one has to have the bends, and the one that you're attaching to it must also have the bends on the positive leads. We are going to begin by taking each of these 3 spacers and we're going to put them in between each of these rows here. It should look something like that. Next, we're going to take our second LED layer. When you're arranging them, you want to make sure that all of the positive leads are pointing in the same direction as the positive leads on the layer that you're attaching them to. I'm going to start just by stacking that on top of the grid like so. All right, I've zoomed in here. At this point, you're going to shift these LEDs so that this bent positive lead of this LED is going to be soldered from here to this positive lead on the second layer. So I'm just going to start by arranging my LEDs. Now, as you can see, not all of the positive leads are touching the positive leads on the second layer. Only this one here is touching. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to solder this one in place first, and then I can start to move and bend various other leads. Clean the tip. Put a little bit of solder on the tip. Blow that, lock that in place. This one's done. You want to be careful when you're soldering that you make sure that the solder does not blob onto this lead here. If the solder blobs, you've connected the positive to the negative and you're going to have a short circuit here. Now that this one's done, I'm going to move on and tack this one into place over here. There's no real strategy to this. Your goal is just to get 2 pinned into place. At this point, I could actually remove my spacer. So I've actually just pushed the positive lead on this one forward. I'm going to slip the spacer back underneath. And now I'm going to solder this one into place. Clean your tip. I blow just to make sure the solder cools quickly and it stays into place. Now this one's too short, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the spacer off again. I'm going to use my pliers to fix that bend. I'm going to start by pushing that forward. Use my pliers here to push this positive lead forward. I'm going to slide my spacer back in. Now I'm just pushing these 2 leads together so that there's more points of intersection. And now I'm going to solder these 2. Now I've soldered my first row. I can remove the spacer. Just to keep my frame going, I'm actually going to rotate and do this side now. What I'm doing here is I'm just using my needle nose pliers just to push the positive leads closer towards the positive leads of the second layer. This just makes it easier to solder. Before you solder, you always want to make sure that the 2 connections are actually touching. Now I'm going to solder all 4. All right, with this row complete and they're all soldered, I'm going to go ahead, move the spacer into the middle, and I'm going to go ahead and solder these ones. So when you're done, you should have something that looks like this. You know you've done a good job when all of the positive LEDs on the first layer are soldered to the positive leads of the LEDs on the second layer. So there should be 16 solder connections. You're going to follow those steps using the spacers to solder every single 4x4 grid layer on top of each other. It's really important to remember that your very last layer is the layer where all the positive leads are straight and not bent. So this layer, all these positive leads need to be straight. When you're done, you should have a 4x4x4 LED grid.